Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I'm here to tell you about an awesome way for you to rub elbows with your favorite podcast hosts here on the Sports History Network, while at the same time rooting for your hometown team this upcoming NFL season. You've been hearing all about our partner, Tailgate Fantasy, the past few weeks. Well, dig on this. Tailgate created a special Sports History Network league for our listeners, so we can put the word fan back into fantasy football together. It's free to join, and if you do so before the season kicks off, you'll automatically be entered into a drawing for a free t-shirt from one of our other partners, Home Field Apparel. It's a win-win-win! So hurry up today and head to sportshistorynetwork.com/tailgate for all the details. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/tailgate.
Blog Talk Radio.
Tonight we'll go back in time to seasons past, when 22 men graced the rugged fields of yesterday, fighting for one more first down, one more yard gain, one final score that would bring victory after 60 minutes of battle on the gridiron. Tonight we'll explore the world of Gridiron Greats. Welcome to Gridiron Greats, football history and its memorabilia. We're on the Gridiron Greats Publishing and Broadcasting Network, in conjunction with Swick Enterprises. We're live from the Wallingford, Connecticut home of Gridiron Greats Magazine. And I'm Bob Swick, publisher and editor of Gridiron Greats Magazine, and I'll be your host for the show. Gridiron Greats is the only publication in America that focuses upon the history and memorabilia of the North American football game since its inception in 1869. We'll cover 140 plus years of football history and memorabilia. And you can find us on the web at gridirongreatsmagazine.com. We're sponsored by MSB Sports Cards. For one of the largest selections of football cards and memorabilia, vintage, on the web. Check out their website at msbsportscards.com. And we're also sponsored by BST Auctions. Check out all their information to register for their upcoming auction at bstauctions.com. Now, tonight we're going to do something slightly different, as my regular co-host Joe Squires is away for the month of November. I have a special guest co-host, and at the same time being a guest co-host, he's going to be our special guest tonight. And it's at this time I'd like to introduce my guest co-host and special guest, who's a senior contributing writer to Gridiron Greats Magazine, a football memorabilia historian, who has an advanced collection of football cards and memorabilia. He hails from Virginia. I'd like to welcome to the show this evening Mr. Jeff Payne. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Wow, thanks, Bob. I really appreciate being on. This is totally awesome.
Great. I'm happy for you to be on, and you were on our podcast when we were on the Leatherheads Network back in 2013. And I know 4 years have passed, and a lot of different changes that occurred in your collection and the stuff you picked up. And we're going to spend the entire show tonight looking at and talking about the world of football cards, your collection, and a lot of generalized information about football cards, memorabilia, and the state of the hobby and the like. And I'd just like to point out to our audience, Jeff has contributed some amazing articles to Gridiron Greats Magazine. And again, if you haven't subscribed to Gridiron Greats Magazine, you really need to, because it is the only publication in North America that does look at many vintage football sets, memorabilia, the history of the game. It's well worth subscribing, keeping it as a research tool, and in particular looking at Jeff's articles, which have really gone into very deep depth on a lot of different subjects. So we're going to start off. Jeff, how'd you get into collecting, and in particular, collecting football cards?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bob. Like a lot of collectors, I started as a kid, just like you did. Early 70s for me. I think I can trace it back just looking at some of my old cards, which I still have, to about 72. When I got into the hobby, I started with football cards, interestingly enough. I know a lot of kids start with baseball, but I was always more interested in football, and I started with football, and I collected pretty religiously for about 10 years as a kid. Putting together stats, trading doubles with my buddies, and just really enjoying putting top sets together in the 70s. Buddy and I discovered a card shop. It was almost an hour away, so we didn't get there very often, but also a couple of flea markets that had dealers that set up. And I guess through that I was introduced to older cards, which was just amazing when you're a kid, right? I mean, to see football in the 50s and 60s, and see players that you read about in books and things like that was just incredible. And so I did that for about 10 years. I took a pretty long hiatus from the hobby after that. I don't know if you continued to collect, Bob, or did you take a break once you got out of your childhood?
Not really. I've always collected. I would even, in lean times, I would still pick up a few cards here and there, a few packs of cards. And in my case, I discovered shows in the 70s. And I just thought they were the coolest place to be because there's all sorts of older football cards, so on and so forth, even though my disposable income was limited. But in my case, I just kept collecting and got a lot more serious about it later in life when I had more disposable income, which I think is just a classic situation for a lot of collectors because as you obviously have more money, you can buy more things and you can collect more things at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah,
how many years did you take off from 8?
Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say my break was long, almost 25 years.
Wow.
Mainly just because school got in the way and kids and career and all that fun stuff. But it was kind of funny. I look back and the thing I took with me everywhere I went, I went to school in Pennsylvania. I had summer jobs and internships in New York. I went to New Jersey, came down to Virginia, and I always took all my clothes and I always took all my cards wherever I went. They never left my side. I don't know if I was afraid my mom was just going to throw them all away if I left them at home. You hear stories about that. But I never,
that's for sure.
I always had them. I just wasn't actively adding to my set. I would pull them out and look at them occasionally. And, I was always a sportsaholic, so I was reading and writing and talking about sports, but I wasn't actively collecting for a long time.
What was the reason why you got back? Was there anything in particular, or was it a certain incident or show, or how'd you get back into it?
Well, the first thing was my kids. So
okay.
I have two boys, and they started playing sports, and I started coaching sports, and of course they started reading and watching sports on TV. And my wife always says I'm like the Cliff Clavin of football. I mean, if it's an announcer and he's talking about something, I always bring up some trivia about somebody in the past who did something similar, right? And half the time, the next thing out of the guy's mouth is, dude, did you know that Johnny Unitas in 1958 did whatever? And she just looks at me like, that's incredible. But, I would do that with my kids. I would say, hey, Johnny Unitas, I have some Johnny Unitas cards. And I would pull them out and I would show them to them. And they would let them hold them gently and talk to them and tell them about, collecting as a kid and, just kind of enjoying it. And they kind of thought it was cool. And they started collecting. So they started bugging me about packs and we started going to flea markets, and then we discovered a local show, and then we discovered an old school card shop where they had like discount boxes, and we found an antique mall by my in-laws, and it just started to snowball where they were getting into it. And I bought them the Beckett books for Christmas one year, and I taught them how to grade, taught them how to discount off a book, by grade, and I was just teaching them how to do stuff, and they were into it. So we started going to shows, and the problem was that they got smarter than me because they were into it, and pretty soon they knew all the sets by just looking at them. And they knew all the rookies and what year they were, and they knew what the rookies' book values were. And quite honestly, I didn't know any of that stuff anymore, right? So we would go to shows, and they were still little, probably 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And, they didn't really want Dad walking around with them anymore. They didn't need me to walk around with them anymore. And so, they would go together. I'd keep one eye on them. It's usually a little local show, so it's just one room in a hotel or something. And I had a lot of time in my hands, so I was the chauffeur now, nothing more. And so I would browse around, I would talk to the dealers, and started getting the impression that the hobby had changed a lot, obviously, since the 70s. We talked about grading, talked about modern cards and kind of the explosion of cards, and just I was just kind of bumming around, and I'd pick up a few things here and there. So my kids started getting me into it, but the real kicker was when the kids showed me what was on eBay. I knew about eBay, obviously. I'd never really bought or sold anything on it, but one day I was just sitting at home, and they were tootling around on the computer, and my oldest one comes in and he goes, "Dad, you got to see what's on eBay." So I go over to eBay, and he's got the screen up, and it's got a whole screen full of National Chickles. And he knew that I talked about National Chickles. I didn't have any. And I said, "Well, what's this?" And he goes, "Well, these are all the National Chickles you can buy on eBay." And I was like, "Are you serious? I've never seen the National Chickle in my life," right? I mean, you didn't see those at local card shops in the 70s. You don't see those today at a lot of local card shows.
Right.
And I was like, "Are you kidding? People are trading and selling cards on eBay?" Never crossed my mind that such a thing would exist. And so I started tooling around on it, and I was like, "Holy cow, you can get pretty much everything on eBay. This is awesome." And I think at that point I said, "You know what? I'm going to start collecting again. The kids are doing it. It's a fun thing for us to do together. I don't know how long they'll do it, right? You never know with kids. But I got to pull my sets out, see what I'm missing, and, start filling in the holes. And maybe I'll start trying to get some of the older stuff. As you mentioned, I'm older now. I've got more disposable income. I can buy the stuff I could never afford as a kid. It's readily available online. So I just, I had to find a run of cards I wanted to go after. And I think this was around 2009. And just started back in. Started jumping online, joining forums, and discovered your magazine, which I absolutely love. And just got back into it with the kids, and it's been 8 years now. It's been completely awesome. Greatest decision I ever made was to get back into the hobby. So really happy.
Well, that's a very, very interesting story, and to me it's somewhat classic too, because I know several collectors who brought their sons in. The sons are collecting in one area, the father collects the other area. And it's a good time together. And there's still, in my opinion, some good shows to go to and hit. And even the local shows are interesting to me here in Connecticut. You can still, find stuff on occasion. But, again, it's a classic story for a lot of collectors. They take that time off. They rediscover their hobby, and they go back into it. And, again, it was more the mid-'80s when you had the baseball card explosion. Even though I stayed with football, I still saw that I always said to myself, football is going to take off at some point, and there's going to be a lot more cards at the market, and it's not going to be as fun as it used to be. And sure enough, it came true between 89 and 92. And until this day, you got, 25 different sets of 2016, 17, whatever. Who collects it is beyond me, and just the way the hobby is today. It's just amazing. Now, there's something that you're defined by. I think all collectors are defined by, and in your case, I know it's your run of football cards. So I want to spend some time in depth talking about your run of cards. First of all, give us a generalized, give our audience a generalized list of what you have as far as sets and years, and then we'll go into why you went into that kind of a run to collect.
Yeah, so the run is, I know it by heart, 15,208 cards. And it basically is every mainstream nationally distributed football card between 1888 and 1988. I wanted to see if I could put together a run of everything that I considered to be kind of, mainstream but nationally distributed, nothing regional or oddball, from the major set producers. And I wanted to see if I could put together a run of those cards. I didn't actually know whether it was even doable when I started or whether I could ever finish it. But, I defined it, and, it took me 7 years to finish it, 7+ years to finish it.
Wow.
And in terms of sets in that run, so, my thought was cut it off when it went crazy after 1988, just like you said. I mean, I still collected the Topps regular sets. I have all those, as I know you do, through when Topps lost their license for the NFL. That's when I stopped with Modern too. So I did pick up those just so I'd have my Topps run all the way to the end of Topps, unfortunately. I hope they get it back someday. But yeah, I mean, it includes the first football card, of course, the 1888 Harry Beecher from the Goodwin Champions N162 set. It includes the 1894 Mayos, the 1926 Spalding Champions football subset in that multi-sport set, the 1933 Thorpe, Grange, and Rockney from the Sport Kings set, the 1935 Chickle. Now, those are the pre-war ones. In post-war, it's, all Topps cards from 48 through 88, Leaf in 48 and 49, Fleer 60 to 63, Philadelphia 64 to 67, New Card in 61, Burke Ross in 51, Bowman 48 to 55, and Fleer action from 76 to 88. Probably can tell I sort of know what those cards are.
Wow.
I've said that in my head so many times. That's the run as I defined it.
Wow. That's an amazing run. And as anybody knows, pre-World War II football cards to me are very scarce. I have started and stopped a lot of those sets over the years, especially the Chickles. The only one are the Mayos that I continue to try to pursue. And as those people who know me know, I dislike graded cards for a variety of reasons. But that is the only set I'm putting together in SGC grade 20 to 30. And it's been a pretty long climb to find anything there. And again, I see a lot of inconsistencies as far as their grades are concerned, because I got a couple of 50s that look like 20s, and I got a couple of 20s that look like 50s. So it's kind of
ridiculous.
It's kind of interesting to see the wide variations on those. And I just don't like those. I don't like the Mayos and the PSA holders. They just don't look good to me. They're very unattractive. The SGC black background, however to describe it in the holder, really adds a lot of beauty to the card. So it looks a lot nicer, in my opinion, than that. For your Mayos, though, I'm pretty sure you're split between PSA and SGC on that, or did you cross over everything?
They are all SGC. Well, I have two. Well, I have 2.5 Mayo sets. So just to be clear, I love the Mayo set.
You got 2.5?
Yeah, I do. I have triples of Mayos.
Wow.
It wasn't by design. So when I first started, I was collecting pretty much anything and everything Mayo. When I got to the Mayo set in my run and I was focusing on Mayo, I didn't care whether it was SGC, whether it was Raw, whether it was PSA, and I did have a combination of all of them scattered around. But then I got a chance to pick up 10 of them from a dealer who was looking to move them, knew I was working on the Mayo set, and they were higher quality than the ones I had because I was just picking up anything I could find, and Mayos are really hard to find in reasonable quality. They were all SGC 50s or SGC 60s. I was like, wow. I didn't have any that were graded at that level in my set, and I had a complete set, but they were all lower grade. I picked up those 10 and said, I ought to try to put the Mayo set together, all SGC 50 or 60, other than, of course, the Dunlop, which you're not getting in a 50 or a 60. And so I've been working on that, and as I've been doing that, I've been obviously replacing ones in my master set and just putting them into the other set. And some of them I've upgraded a couple times, so that gave me triples, and that's kind of how I ended up with the number. I am not done yet. I think I need 8 cards to get the entire set, other than the Dunlop, to an SGC 50. But as you mentioned, some of those cards, I look at them, and I know that if I tried to cross them or if I had them regraded, they wouldn't be 50s. I mean, the grades are all over on that set. It's really it is ridiculous. But hey, what can you do?
Yep. Yeah, and that's the one thing that, to me, I think is the biggest roadblock for me to actually go out and finish the set. Because again, I've seen some 20s and 30s at shows. And I'm saying to myself, man, these look lousy. And for me to dump $300-400 on that card in that condition, I said I'd rather get a nicer 20 or 30. I'm willing to pay a little more money for it, and just make it look nicer, type of thing. I don't know if you saw on eBay there was a Dunlop that was raw that the dealer was basically selling as a reprint, and to me it didn't look good. It looked like a years later, for those who don't know, the Mayo set got reprinted, and a lot of those cards have been scuffed up to make look old and try to pass off as being the original cards. And this, to me, really looked like one of those types of cards. I wasn't comfortable with it at all. I didn't bother seeing what it actually went for. I don't think it sold for a lot of money because I had a feeling it was a reprint one way or the other. And I'm sure the dealer who was selling it, if he was, savvy enough, he would have just sent it to the grading service and just say, is this legit? If it's not legit, then I know I got a reprint, and that's it. You know what I mean? So I saw that. There's no way that was legit. Yeah.
It's kind of funny because when I first got into the hobby, I couldn't tell the difference, right? And I always used to ask people. I would say, well, how do you tell? What do you look at? And the people that were good at kind of separating the fakes from the real, they give you some information, but it's kind of, you just kind of know it when you see it, kind of a thing, right? And you just look at it and you go, that's not right. It just doesn't quite look right. And you can't put your finger on it. Is it the sheen? Is it the color? Is it the way it's aged? It's a whole bunch of things. Yeah, I saw that thing and I was like, no way is that legit.
Exactly.
Did it close already? Do you know? I didn't even check whether it closed.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it closed.
To me. Yeah, I don't know if it did or not.
It sold for $51. It had 18 bids on it. So somebody took a chance. And if I'm looking at the bidders, they're all people that should know better. I mean, in terms of, they have a lot of feedback. So, there's no way that was real.
Well, to really scare you, back in it was either 84 or 85, I got to look at my notes. There was an ad in SCD of a dealer that had a bunch of the Mayos for sale, obviously raw, and they were $25 each at the time, which I thought was an astounding price for them. So again, looking back, this was like 32 years ago. So I called the dealer because there was no internet back then, obviously, and there was no cell phone, so you had to call on a landline. So I called. I finally got a hold of the guy, and he said, "Well, I only got 2 left." And he said, "You could have both of them with the shipping for $50. I won't charge you for the shipping." But he says, "I need a postal money order. I don't want to check on it." So I had to go to the post office to get a money order for the $50. I mailed it. The guy was good with it. He sent me the cards, and they were pretty beat up. They were nothing great. But I said to myself, if I had seen the ad sooner, I probably would have bought. And I did want to buy like 4 or 6 of them at the time, figuring that, I put them away and then I'll figure out how many cards are in the set and see if I can ever put it together. But that never occurred. And the same thing with the Beecher card, way back when. The Beecher card was not, I don't even know what it's going for today. I'm sure it's big bucks. But the Beecher card at one time, you could pick up literally for $200 or $300 raw and in relatively nice condition. So I find it an interesting card. One day, hopefully, I'll pick it up for my collection just to say I had it. But those to me are probably 2 of the biggest keys of your collection, those set, and then also the Spaldings, which are very, very rare one way or the other. So, and the other point I want to make about your collection, that you're obviously got a greater run than mine, but you finished the 52 large, right? 52 Bowman large. So you have it in the small and the large, right? Okay.
Yes.
So that's a tough.
Yeah,
that's
you mentioned
52 Bowman.
Going to say you mentioned the Spaldings. I don't think people really understand how hard those are. I mean, a lot of people say of all the sets, in the run, what was the hardest one to complete? And it's not even close. I mean, Spalding is so much harder than Chickle and Mayo. It is incredible. Right. I did a population study where I went out to the pop reports, of course, and those aren't always accurate, but I at least took a look at how many Spaldings were graded, football Spaldings were graded. And then I contacted some people that I know collect, pre-war football, who know a lot of the people that are in the hobby collecting pre-war stuff. And I tried to put together a population report that included not only graded cards, but ungraded raw cards in that set. And I was only able to find 129 total cards that existed across those 15 Spalding cards from 1926. There was no card with a population over 13, and there were 6 cards with a population under 6 that can be found at all. And it's just, those are really, really hard to find. Really hard to find.
Oh, they are, most definitely. I mean, again, until I started going to nationals, I really never saw them at any shows that I attended from Massachusetts to New York and New Jersey. I mean, they were rare, and to complete that set is just an incredible accomplishment, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot. What are the 6 most favorite items, cards that you have in your collection? And for each one, let me know if you remember if you bought it at a show, if you bought it online, bought it at an auction, or you traded for it.
Wow. Whew. Yeah, you said you were going to ask that question. I wish I had come up with an answer. Well, I do some. Certainly, there's some things that stick out, and we talk about my run, but I love memorabilia too, mostly pre-war memorabilia, because I love the history of the sport. I mean, one of the things that sticks out from my childhood was I read a lot. I loved to read. I got that from my dad. He is a voracious reader. He reads everything on the planet, and he hooked me on reading at a very young age. And because I was so into sports, I read everything I could find about sports. I read every sports book in the elementary school library and the middle school library where I went to school, and maybe some of them twice just for fun. And so I knew all these people. I knew Thorpe and Grange and Nagurski, and I knew about these great games like the sneaker game because I read all the books on them, right, as a kid.
Right.
And so when I started collecting cards, originally I was just going to do my run, and I figured I'd be done with football. I'd have every card I'd ever won, and that would be great. But then I started seeing what was out there for some of these icons from my youth that I read about, and I was like, oh my goodness gracious, I got to have something that Thorpe had. I got to have something that Grange had. I got to have something, with the Kenton Bulldogs or whatever. And so, I did move into memorabilia, and I have a lot of memorabilia. My favorite piece in my whole collection, by far and away, is I was able to get a cabinet, an imperial cabinet of Jim Thorpe. It's got to be 1911, 1912. He's in his Carlisle uniform. It's imperial sized, and it's autographed. It's signed by Thorpe.
Wow.
It says very respectfully, James Thorpe, 1912 football captain on the front of it.
Wow.
And it's in a cabinet from Hensel Studios, which is a very famous studio in Carlisle that photographed a lot of the athletes and other people from the Carlisle school. And it is by far my favorite item. There's just no question, because I love Thorpe. He's one of my favorite all-time icons, and I've never seen another one. I've seen the cabinet, the imperial cabinet. I've seen a couple of them. There are a few collectors that have them out there, so there was more than one made, but I've never seen another one that's signed.
Wow.
And that's kind of my favorite piece. I got that. Actually, it came up on eBay, of all places.
Wow.
And I saw it, and I was like, oh, wow, that can't be real. I was like, that can't be legit.
Right. I was just going to say,
of course,
that all the red flags go off when you see it on eBay.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But I figured, well, it's worth, he had an astronomical price on it, of course. And I was like, well, I'll watch it. I'll see what happens. And, of course, nobody bought it. And so I contacted him afterwards. Said, hey, I really love that piece, and I'd really love it, but, as you saw, the price you got on it is just not one people are willing to pay. Would you consider an offline deal? And we started chatting about it. And I learned a lot about it, actually. I do like to know the provenance of the stuff I get. I love provenance because it's history, right? And so I always try to ask for the stuff that's unique. Where did it come from? Where'd you get it? What do you know about it? And I write it all down. So I've got it all. So, when I pass it on to whatever, or I sell it or whatever, the history of the piece goes with it, which I think is really important in our hobby. And so this guy had actually bought it. He was in Oklahoma. It's a good sign, right? Bought it at an auction, a local auction in Oklahoma. And he wasn't sure it was legit either, but he took a flyer on it because it looked really nice. And he did talk to the person who consigned it to the local auction house. And they had found it in a farmhouse. It was a relative. They were cleaning out his stuff. He was a pack rat. He had a lot of stuff from the early 1900s in the house, apparently, antiques and other things. And in the closet was a suitcase. And in the suitcase was a bunch of clothing. And in the middle of it were some items. There was this framed Thorpe cabinet, and there were some ribbons from Teddy Roosevelt's presidential campaign, and some other kind of things from the teens, kind of stuffed inside of here, protected. Maybe it was in there. It could have been in there for 100 years. Who knows how long that stuff was in there? But he had it authenticated. I said, well, I'm not going to buy it from you unless you get it authenticated. So he actually got it authenticated by several different authenticators. I asked him for multiple, and it had to be, the real authenticators, not the fake ones. And so he actually drove it down to an authenticator, JSA, and he took it over to one of the other ones as well. He took it to a couple auction houses too. He took it to Heritage, and they tried to wrestle it out of his hands. And he said, no, I'm not giving this to you. Thank goodness. And we were able to strike a deal. It almost fell through several times because he was very nervous about about letting this go and making sure he got paid and all that stuff, but we were able to make it work, and I got it. So I was pretty happy and relieved when it showed up and wasn't damaged, and it was definitely legit. So that was pretty cool.
Unbelievable.
So that's my favorite piece. Yeah, that's my favorite. My second favorite is probably an AFL piece that I got through auction. I got it through BST. Go BST. Love BST. It's a piece. It's called the Foolish Club. You probably saw it a couple years ago or so.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Back in when the AFL started, Lamar Hunt and the other owners all called themselves the Foolish Club because they were going against the NFL, and so many other leagues had tried to do that and had not been successful, and a lot of people thought they were very foolish for trying that, and so they called themselves the Foolish Club. When they got to be 5 years old in '65, they had kind of made it, and Namath had signed, and things were progressing toward what ultimately would be a merger, the NFL. Lamar Hunt had a composite piece made for each of the owners. All 8 owners got one. So there's 8 of these that were produced. And it's real simple. In the middle of it, it just says the Foolish Club, age 5. And there's 8 candid photos, one of each team with the name of the team under it. And it's framed. And he gave one of those to each of the 8 owners of the AFL. And this one came from the Jets. So provenance on that is the son of Sonny Werblin, who owned the Jets at that time, ended up with it when his dad passed. He said that it had hung in the Jets headquarters for years and years, and he ended up with it, decided that he didn't really want it, and he put it out there, made it available. And our friend Todd Tobias, Mr. AFL, saw it and got it, and later decided to move it down the road, and I ended up with it. What's cool is on the back, it still has the little return address sticker for the framing company in Dallas, Texas, that Lamar Hunt had obviously framed these pieces. And so I had the original frame put inside of a shadow box. I did the same thing with the Thorpe piece, basically to put UV glass on the front of them. Because I was worried that, they would fade over time. But I didn't want to disturb the original frame. But I had the framer cut out a section in the back so you could still see that label on the back. And you could see that, it came from the original framer. There's only 2 of them that I've been able to locate. This one and the Kansas City Chief one, the one Lamar Hunt made for himself. I know because I read an article on it. It is in the Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Fame at Arrowhead Stadium. The rest of them, who knows where they ended up and whether they're still even, out there somewhere.
That's an amazing piece. That's a beautiful piece. I do remember that from the auction. That was very nice.
Yeah. I got to put my Dunlop in there. We've already talked about Mr. Dunlop. But I do love that Mayo card. That would probably be my third item. My fourth, I would say, is probably I have a 1916 composite of the Canton Bulldogs. You probably remember I wrote an article on that team for Gridiron Greats a while back, and it's a beautiful piece. It's got images of all the players from that team on it. They won the Ohio League championship that year. Thorpe is on it. Gus Welch is on it, who's his teammate at Carlisle and was the quarterback of the Bulldogs, and all sorts of other great players. It's just a phenomenal piece. I've seen that image reprinted hundreds of times out there, but this is an original from that year. So that's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece. And that was a great article too. That was very informative about that.
Thanks.
About it and about that time too.
Yeah, I can never tell what people are going to like and not like. It's hard to tell when you write. I tend to like stuff that's a little bit more unique and oddball versus the mainstream stuff because there's just not a lot written about that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So you got 2 more favorite pieces if you do have them.
Yep. Well, I'm going to throw my my complete set of 1950 Bread for Health football labels in there, because I just absolutely love bread labels, and it is so hard to put that set together. There were some that came up on eBay recently, and they went for quite a bit of money individually. It was kind of fun to watch them. I actually picked up a couple as upgrades, But I love that set. I got it at auction. It was the set that the Dryers put together back when Doug and Chad Dryer were scooping up every sport and non-sport memorabilia thing on the planet. They put that set together, and I was fortunate enough to get it at auction when they decided to sell all their stuff. So that would be number 5. Number 6, I would say, would probably be my short print red grain Shotwell card. And this is a new edition. You probably remember the recent BST auction with all of Mike Blaisdell's stuff in it. There's a short print, I think you and Joe talked about it, of the number 9 add back in the Shotwell set.
Right.
That there's only 2 known to exist. Mike had one when he decided to downsize. He consigned it, and I was lucky enough to pick it up. I was pretty excited about that because I've been after that card forever. I have the rest of the Shotwells and a lot of other companion piece Shotwells, but I really didn't know if I would ever get that card. That was one of those that you might never see.
Exactly.
So that would probably be number 6.
That's great. Now, with that kind of collection, what are your collecting goals now, if any? And what's the hottest thing on your want list at this time, if you have one?
Oh, I have a want list. Yeah. Well, I've been working on stuff outside the run. You know, when I got about, I'd say, 3 years into the run, I started having trouble finding stuff. So I got through all the easy stuff, and everything that was left was either expensive, which meant I had to be careful and make sure I got it at a reasonable price, or it just never came up. And so I actually at that point started looking around for, what else can I pick up in the meantime while I wait for stuff. Because I'm not one of those collectors that wants to wait, months and months and months and never pick stuff up. I like to be constantly looking at stuff, constantly trying to find good things and just, keep engaged with the hobby. So I started working on oddball sets. I'm still working on many of those. I love the Pottsville Maroons. So I do collect memorabilia and the Pottsville postcards from the Maroons. So I'm always after those. I'm working on a run of championship team photos of every NFL championship team the year they won the championship. So I'm going up to when the AFL and NFL merged. So through 69. And I'm working on that. That's really hard because the 20s and 30s are virtually impossible to find and then get. But I'm making some progress on that. There's some certain players that I go after pretty much everything associated with them. So I love Thorpe, love Grange, a big Benny Friedman fan. I'm going to write an article eventually for you on Benny Friedman, some of his cards, and just the fact that, he really was the first pure passer in the NFL, and most people don't even know who he is. He held every NFL passing record for like a decade and a half. He was so far advanced in terms of his passing skills versus everybody else, and nobody hardly knows who he is, and it took him forever to get into the Hall of Fame. I think it wasn't until after he passed away that he was inducted. So I work to, pick up anything to do with those players, cards, memorabilia, anything, out there. I've been noodling with trying to put together a bigger run. So try to figure out how I could expand the run into, oddball sets and food products and things and create a new run that I can go after, but I haven't quite figured out, what that's going to be yet.
That's tough because there's so much oddball out there. For me, it was always 48 to 88. Anything oddball 48 to 88, I tried to collect. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is just so difficult to find. It's not even funny, and I lost a lot of steam on it. And I got to thank you for. I think it was a couple of years back. You gave me that Fairmont Sheets card. It was the first one I ever had for my collection, and that was a beauty. And I got to say this: all the shows I've ever been to, with the exception of the Nationals, I never saw one Fairmont Sheets card anywhere. And those were little side panels on the milk cartons, from Fairmont Dairy, and they had the Kansas City Chief players on it. And then they're rare to try to find. I mean, they're just not out there.
And nobody really knows the full checklist either. That's the other problem.
Right.
You know, there are a few people who focus on and collect those, and that's usually where I get most of the ones that I get is when they get doubles or whatever, because they're hardcore into it. But, you know, they'll admit nobody really knows the checklist and what the full checklist is of those. It's not really written down anywhere, and the books have it wrong. And so, who knows what the checklist for that set looks like. And there's a lot of oddball sets like that.
Right. Well, speaking of that, speaking of picking up stuff, what do you prefer, auctions, buying online, or buying at a show? I think everybody has their own area that they like buying from. So what's yours?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that a couple different ways. First, I buy from them all. I'm not choosy. I would say my favorite thing is to buy from private people, so other collectors. I love doing deals with other collectors. I don't sell a lot of stuff because I kind of like my stuff, so I don't really sell. More of a hoarder than a collector at this point. But when I do, it's always to another collector. It's somebody who I know wants something or needs something, and I have two, and I'm like, why do I need two? This person wants this, and, let me pass it along and help another collector. But I love doing private deals. I don't know if Joe told you, but Joe and I did a trade recently, Squires.
Yep.
And, that's the first trade I've done since I was a kid. And it was so much fun that I definitely want to do more. It's just really hard to find people, right, when you collect this stuff that have something you need and you have something they need, it can be tricky.
Exactly.
But that was really fun. Really enjoyed doing that with Joe, and I'd love to do more trades. I like the auctions. The only ones I don't like are the ones that end in the middle of the night. That drives me crazy. And I've told the auction houses I just can't. I can't do it anymore. I refuse to stay up now. And I am so glad that BST and Love of the Game and a bunch of other auction houses are starting to change their approach. And I hope that's a trend that carries over.
There has to be some normalcy with that. That's kind of ridiculous. I mean, really, it's unbelievable. People got to stay up 24 hours straight just to watch their auctions. I mean, it's crazy. Doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it is crazy, and I truly believe there's no evidence that matters. I know the consigners. Some of them believe it. I've looked far and wide. I've looked for papers that talk about auction formats and just for any evidence or information of people that have done studies on auctions and what works and what doesn't and whatever. And the reality is I can't find any data that says keeping it open all night is better than making it a hard close and forcing people to bid what they want to bid for it. And I always tell the auction houses, because they always say, do you like lots of lots? Do you like hard close? Do you like rolling? Do you like one at a time? I say, you know what? I don't care. Everyone you're going to have a different strategy for, because each one you got to approach a little differently. But as long as I'm awake when it closes, that's all I care about. You just tell me what the rules are, and I'll figure out how I want to bid. But I got to be awake. That's the key.
I agree. Well, when we were at the National this past year, we talked very briefly about this. And just give our audience a few ideas of your thoughts and impressions of a national, like the national show, versus a local large show. For example, you're close to the Chantilly show down there in Virginia. What do you see as the difference, or what are your thoughts or impressions between the two types of shows?
Well, we're lucky here in Virginia because the Chantilly show is really good. In fact, I'm guessing that it's probably the biggest regional show in the country at this point. I mean, every show I hear about, when I ask about the number of tables and whatnot, they don't come close to Chantilly. So unless somebody can point me to something bigger, it's the second biggest show in the country, and they have it 3 times a year. I
Right.
definitely get more items at Chantilly than I ever do at the National. I go to the National every
Wow.
year. I love going to the National, but I get more stuff at at Chantilly than I ever do at the National. I like the National more for the relationships and, you know, catching up with people, and it's become kind of a, you know, a community, right? And I think that's why a lot of people go to the National. I think the online auctions have completely destroyed, you know, the need to go to card shows to get stuff, because the reality is I don't see that much at the National that I don't see online, right? And it used to be what I hear from old-time collectors is you went to the National to see the things you could never see anywhere else. And I don't think that's true anymore, and I think that hurts the shows.
Exactly. You know, you got up here in outside of Boston, you got the Shriner Show a couple times a year. It's not called the Shriner Show, whatever it's called today, which is a relatively large show. You could actually see some different things, especially if you want New England sport type of items, you know, oddball Red Sox stuff, oddball Patriots stuff, so on and so forth. And I think the online auction, to a large degree, has really killed a lot of the camaraderie in the hobby, where you used to have at shows, and I know here locally, I did local shows for years here. I mean, you knew everybody, and you knew a lot of collectors, and you knew a lot of dealers, and you knew the dealers that came out of New York or New Jersey a couple times a year to set up at the show. So there was a lot more camaraderie than what you have today. And the National, to me, is like the dying embers of trying to keep people's relationships together in the hobby, you know, so they could see somebody, talk, you know, and just talk one-on-one type of stuff, you know, and that's a big reason why I go, you know.
Yeah,
because
exactly. And
it's
here's
a lot
a great
different talking
example.
in person than talking on the phone. So.
Yeah, perfect example. When my kids started, there were 4 go-to places we had. There was a local card shop that I mentioned. There was an antique mall by my in-laws. There was a local card show right in Tyson's Corner here. And there was a card dealer at a flea market that had a lot of great stuff you could pick through. All 4 of those no longer exist, and that was less than 10 years ago. They're all gone.
Wow.
All the little ones are gone. All the card shops that do the old stuff are gone, right? I mean, it's almost like if you can't sustain or create a big show, all the little stuff is going away, and it makes you wonder how long the regional shows are going to last, and then what's going to be up with the National. Right.
Well, I used a story. It was must have been about 5-6 years ago. A fellow took over one of the local shows here, and you know he needed people to take tables. So I took 2 tables, and I vaguely remember it was like $50 or $60 for the table. I brought a lot of stuff, a lot of mix of cards, publications, pennants, you name it. I had a good mix of stuff. Well, I didn't even make my table fee that day with what I had. And I was just shocked to see how few people actually went to the show. And I was floored. And the promoter said, you know, I got ads every which way. I got I'm in Beckett, I'm in SCD, I'm in the local papers. You know, we hand out hundreds of flyers, and this is what you get. You know, and that scared me when I saw that. I really said to myself, you know, this is not a good sign for the hobby if this is what's going to happen. So that leads me to my next question. That where do you see our hobby over the next, you know, let's say 2 to 10 years? Are there what changes do you think, if any, are going to occur, or in you know, what's your feeling on it?
Yeah, so I'm still bullish on football. I think football, I agree with you. I still think it's undervalued. It's such a popular sport. Now it's got its challenges, right, with the concussion issues, and nobody knows what that's going to do to the game. You've got a different demographic that doesn't watch TV as much anymore. You know, what's that going to do to the game? Football was built for TV. It's the perfect sport for TV. Is it the perfect sport for your phone? I don't know. And how does that translate into how many people will collect and how many people care about football and all that stuff? I just think if you look at football, professional football as an organized league is 50 years younger than professional baseball, almost exactly. Right? Baseball started right around 1870, its first league, formal league. And so we're behind. I mean, we're 50 years behind baseball. And I always look at it simply as, okay, so where were baseball cards 50 years ago? Now, of course, things have changed, so that's not a perfect comparison. But I think people forget how new football really is as compared to baseball. Now, the other challenge, of course, is that the NFL doesn't seem to care about its past. And so it's up to you and me and others to get information out there about the past, because as far as I can tell, if it didn't happen after Super Bowl I, they don't really care that it ever happened.
Right.
But I think football is still undervalued. I think collectors are going to continue to flock to football, even perhaps because baseball is getting too expensive. And I think a lot of people that grew up watching football are getting to the age where they have that discretionary income to get back to their childhood. And they'll start with their childhood cards. But as you and I know, that's a gateway drug to older cards. Right? You start with your childhood stuff, and then you start seeing about the people, like I did, the great names from the past that you read about as a kid, and you start being interested in the older stuff. So I'm pretty bullish on it. I think the kids are continuing to go into the hobby. Maybe not as many as before, but I think there's a long time before the hobby, doesn't see, growth in prices. I think from a football perspective.
Okay. All right, we're down to 4 minutes, and I got a couple more things I want to ask you real quick. Any advice for somebody getting into collecting football cards and football memorabilia?
Yeah, so, obviously you start with what you love and whatever. I would say that the thing that I did wrong when I started was, and somebody told me this and I didn't really listen, which was focus on the level of quality that you want. As a kid, it didn't matter. I just wanted the card. It didn't matter if it went through the washing machine. And I've got cards that clearly went through the washing machine. I must have traded for them because I didn't put any of mine through the washing machine. But these cards have been through the washing machine. And I just took it because I needed it, right? What you find out as you get into it is you start getting pickier sometimes, and you start deciding you don't like certain things. Maybe you don't like creases, or you don't like rounded corners, or you don't like writing on the back, or you don't like whatever, which at first you're okay with, but then you're not, right? I kind of liken it to drinking wine. When I first started drinking wine, any $5 bottle at the local supermarket tasted fine, right? And then I started learning a little bit about it, and I started reading the ratings, and I got some wines that I kind of liked. I was like, these are pretty good. And then when I tasted that other stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrible, right? The stuff I used to love. So your taste kind of changed, and I think that happens with your cards. And so as I went through my run, I started getting pickier. I'm not a high grade collector. I'm not a graded person. I don't get cards graded unless they come graded. But my tastes were getting pickier. And what that means is part of my run, my older sets, they're not at the level of quality that I wish they were. And now I'm going back and I'm upgrading them because I want all my cards to, when I look at them, I want to enjoy them. And if I don't like the fact that there's a crease, I got to replace it. So I always tell people, even if it means holding out a little longer, figure out what grade you really like and what you want the card to look like, eye appeal, and go for that eye appeal and wait out for that eye appeal, because otherwise you'll buy something and then you'll just end up wanting to replace it, right? So that would be my advice for people getting into it.
I agree with that because I always refer back to my 48 and 49 Leaf sets, which are some of those cards in that set are the beaters beyond beaters. And
you and
a lot
I
of them
trade
are
with each other because mine are exactly the same way. They're not in good shape.
The high number 48s are just nightmares. But you know what? I put that set together quite a while ago, and it holds a lot of memories for me. When I put them together, we're going to have on our next show, which you're going to be on as my co-host. I got a very good collecting story with that guest on that 48 Leaf set, so I'm going to save it for that night. But I do agree with you. That's something I never really thought about in my collecting days, my early collecting days. If I found something, I would just collect it, and that's it. Well, we're almost out of time, Jeff. I truly appreciate you being on the show as a one and all co-host and guest. You got an incredible collection, and I truly appreciate you being on. You're going to be back on our next show, which is going to be coming up next week. and we're going to be interviewing super collector Mike Rich. Jeff will be my guest co-host for that show. Jeff, I appreciate you being on tonight. And I just want to remind everybody, we're sponsored by MSB Sports Cards. Check out their website at msbsportscards.com. And we're also sponsored by BST Auctions. Check out their website and register for their auctions, bstauctions.com. All right, Jeff, we got 20 seconds. Final thoughts, of anything?
Just it was an honor, Bob. This was so much fun. And you do so much for the hobby. I don't think people realize how important what you do is. And I certainly appreciate it and applaud you and thank you for doing the podcast and also doing the magazine. It's wonderful stuff. So thank you.
Well, and I thank you for your contributions to the magazine and to the podcast, because that's what I need. That's what to hear from collectors and writing from a collecting perspective. That's what our hobby's all about, and that's what sometimes is lost in translation. All right, we're out of time. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week for another show. Take care.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.